At a time when he had already achieved recognition as one of America's most eminent inventors and physicists, Thomas A. Edison conducted a series of experiments in thought transference. He constructed an elaborate electric apparatus and sought, by means of it, to bring about purely mental communication. But, as he himself freely admitted, he obtained not the slightest results. And yet, Thomas Edison believed in extrasensory perception, for long before this he had met a man called Reese, the man who saw everything. Ken?
It was a friend of Thomas Edison's, a young woman named Miss Olson, who first interested him in the man named Reese. A few days later, Reese appeared at Edison's laboratory.
Well, let's have a demonstration.
All right, sir. Miss Olson, would you mind going into the other room and writing down on a piece of paper your mother's name, the place of her birth?
1 minute there, young man. What proof do I have that you and Miss Olson haven't made a few prior arrangements before you ever got here? No, I demand to be the subject. I'll be the one who goes out of the room.
And with that, Thomas Edison, his eyes twinkling brightly and a smile of triumph on his face, slipped out of the room and walked across the courtyard to an adjoining building.
My experiment with the alkaline electric battery. He couldn't know about that, because nobody in the world but myself does.
Chuckling to himself, he scribbled in small and almost illegible letters the question which had so long troubled him.
Is there anything better than hydroxide of nickel for an alkaline battery?
Then he folded the paper several times and held it clutched in his hand. And then at last he left the building and retraced his steps to the room where Reese and Miss Olson awaited him. He said nothing as he entered. It was Reese who spoke first.
Do you really want my opinion, Mr. Edison?
Why? Oh, I don't know what you're talking about, young man.
Well, you asked me a question, didn't you? And here's the answer. No, there is nothing better than hydroxide of nickel for an alkaline battery.
Thomas Edison had no explanation for the incident. He could only accept it as valid and authentic, if incomprehensible. As he himself put it,
I do not pretend to be able to explain this faculty. I am convinced that the needs of civilization will produce some great discovery by means of men endowed with this power. The rare seers of the present generation will become the multitude of coming generations.
In these words, America's great scientist expressed his faith in a power which is still looked upon with skepticism by other scientists of lesser stature than he. A power that enables men to see without the use of their senses. A power incredible but true.
In the annals of the strange and the incredible, death has always played a significant role. For it is inevitable that the great mystery which has intrigued men's minds since the beginning of time should itself be surrounded by countless minor mysteries. Of all of these, none is more curious, none more difficult to explain than the tantalizing story of Geoffroy de Rossier's mirror.
Geoffroy de Rossier was dying. He lay in a ward at the War Memorial Hospital in Sault Ste. Marie. His nurse, Adeline Knoop, hovering near his bed, knew that the end could not be far off. Indeed, she thought that consciousness had already slipped away. But then, to her astonishment, Geoffroy de Rossier opened his eyes, and his lips moved feebly.
A mirror. Bring me a mirror.
Hastening to obey what was unquestionably his last wish, Nurse Knoop found the mirror and brought it to him. It was just an ordinary mirror, a rectangular piece of glass without a frame. He took it in his trembling hands and held it before his face.
Madame, I'm dying.
Nurse Knoop and 3 other occupants of the ward heard that wild, frantic cry. They saw him throw the mirror down on the steel table that stood beside his bed. But it did not break. It lay where it had fallen. And Geoffroy de Rossier slumped weakly back on his pillows. But before he lost consciousness completely, de Rossier murmured one final mysterious statement. And every person in the room heard it.
That mirror. You won't be able to pick it up.
Later that morning, when the body of Geoffrey Drossier had been removed, Nurse Knoop assisted in preparing the bed for a new patient. And then the mirror, still lying on the table, caught her eye. She bent to pick it up. A moment later, her face suddenly white, she hurried out of the room and summoned an intern who was passing in the corridor.
Please,
When she told him her story, he followed her to the bed, chuckling with amusement.
I want to show it to you.
Relax, nurse. I don't think I'd be too upset about this.
But I tell you, it won't budge.
You've heard of an E-Day Fix, haven't you? The late patient planted the idea in your mind, and it stayed there, that's all. He said you wouldn't be able to pick up the mirror, and lo and behold, you can't pick it up.
Let's see you pick it up.
Good Lord. For some strange reason, it's stuck to the table.
And it remained stuck for 24 hours. During that time, practically every doctor and nurse on the floor tried to move it. And throughout that whole day and night, there was scarcely a person in the War Memorial Hospital who was not recalling, with a shudder, those strange last words of Geoffrey de Rossier. The following morning, Nurse Adeline Knoop came back on duty. Her first act, when she entered the ward, was to approach the bedside table. The occupants of the other beds watched attentively as she made one final effort to remove the mirror.
I just touched it. Why, it flew high in the air.
After that, the mirror was carefully examined. No chemical or adhesive substance was found, either on it or on the surface of the table. Efforts were made to force it to readhere to the table, but they were unsuccessful. It still remains a mystery. A mystery incredible, but true.
The name of James Watt is invariably associated with the invention of the steam engine and with little else. It is not generally known that he was also responsible for numerous other less important but still useful contrivances. Nor do many realize that one of his major discoveries belongs, because of its curious origin, in the chronicles of the strange and the incredible.
Within a few years after it was first conceived, James Watt's steam engine was a commercial success. And in the year 1783, its inventor was enjoying both the income and the prestige to which his great scientific contribution entitled him. It came, therefore, as something of a surprise to Dr. McGregor, the pastor of the local church, when Watt appeared at his door early one summer morning, clad in a workman's overalls.
I'd like to climb the church steeple. The church steeple? What for, Mr. Watt? It's an experiment I want to try. A crazy idea I got in my brain, and I cannot get it out. And I came by it in a crazy way. What way was that? I cannot tell you now for fear you'd laugh. But if you let me climb, Doctor, and if the experiment works, why, then I'll tell you the queerest story you ever heard.
A few moments later, the inventor appeared carrying a large kettle in his hand. Perched precariously at the very top of the steeple, he raised the kettle and, with a sudden gesture, overturned it. Unable to restrain himself longer, Dr. McGregor ran down the porch steps and raced toward the church. But even before he arrived there, James Watt had descended from the steeple. The pastor found the famous man knee-deep in the waters of the moat, shouting excitedly.
It worked! Dr. McGregor, it worked! I've stumbled on a new scheme for making ammunition. You drop molten lead, and it turns into gunshot.
Yes, Dr. McGregor's church steeple proved to be the first shot tower ever used. More than a century thereafter, leaden shot was the chief ammunition employed in the wars of Europe. And even today, similar shot towers are still in operation. But it is doubtful whether even their owners know the story that James Watt told Dr. McGregor that same morning. The strange story of what had led him to his experiment.
But I do not see, Mr. Watt, how you knew the lead would disintegrate when you dropped it.
I came by the idea in a queer sort of way. 'Twas in a dream.
A dream?
Aye, a dream that kept a-coming back to me next after next after next. I'd be standing in an open field, and all of a sudden, the clouds would burst and the rain would start beating down around me. Then I'd hold out my hand to feel the drops, and they'd be hard in my hand like little balls of metal, and I'd say to myself, why, man, 'tis raining leaden raindrops, and that's a queer thing indeed. And then I'd wake, and the remembering of those drops wouldn't let me sleep again. And so at last I said to myself, could it be that fallen lead disintegrates, as you call it, and forms the shape of gunshot? And so I decided to find out, and I did, and that's all there is to it. 'Tis a strange thing, I know, How would you explain it?
But neither the man of God nor any other man since has been able to explain James Watt's strange dream. Had he unconsciously grasped the principle of his remarkable discovery and then projected it in the form of the ring symbol? Or was the dream what he himself intimated it was? A miracle. A miracle incredible but true.
Amazing stories of the sea, there is one which invariably evokes a smile of skepticism and disbelief. But that smile vanishes whenever the story itself is supplemented by the convincing evidence of its truth. The New York Sun of October 9th, 1931, published a complete account of the incredulous affair. Here is that story.
It was a long and hazardous voyage that Captain Neil Curry undertook when his ship sailed out of the harbor of Liverpool that morning in 1881. But as the days passed and the wind blew fair, everyone, captain, his wife, and the crew alike, was lulled into a false security. And then, on a certain night, when the ship lay 1,500 miles off the coast of Mexico, catastrophe struck.
Captain Curry! Captain, sir! In the galley, sir! Fire's broken out!
Long before the captain and his wife reached the galley, the smell of smoke stung their nostrils. When they arrived, the flames were already consuming the walls and creeping hungrily out into the other parts of the hold.
It's no use, sir. We can't stop it.
All right, leader. Give the order to abandon ship. There were only 3 lifeboats, and they were pitifully frail. For a time, the eyes of every man in them were pinned on the fiery hulk which they had left behind them. As they watched in horror, it began to settle, and slowly the waves washed over it.
Then there's no hope at all. We'll die of thirst.
Yes, unless a ship comes. But no ship came. The night passed, another day, and another night. And now, their lips were cracked, and their tongues parched, and they spoke in hoarse whispers.
I can't stand it. There's water there. I'm going to get down.
You fool! That's salt water.
Neil, look. The water around us, it looks different. It's always been blue, and now it's green. But it looks like the water in a pool or a lake. Neil, I'm going to try.
Captain Curry bent forward and seized his wife's arm. But he was too late. She had dipped her hand into the sea, and now her fingers were in her mouth.
It's fresh water. There's no salt in it. We can drink it.
Captain Curry's wife had not gone mad. There, in the midst of the ocean, the captain and his crew leaned over the sides of their boats and drank their fill. And when their thirst was slaked, they took up their vigil again with renewed hope. And when at last a ship appeared and they were taken aboard, they knew that they owed their lives to a miracle without parallel in the history of the sea. A miracle incredible but true.